The sound of the verdict was a physical blow. Guilty. The words spoken by the jury foreman, with a kind of weary finality, sucked the air from the stuffy Greenville County courtroom. It landed on Monique Hayes like a physical weight, her body slumping as a choked sob escaped her lips. Beside her, her attorney, Clara Bennett, felt a familiar sickening combination of ice and fire surge through her veins. Ice for the cold, calculated injustice she had just witnessed. Fire for the righteous fury that was already beginning to burn. Clara placed a steadying hand on Monique's trembling shoulder, but her eyes were locked on the man presiding from the bench. Judge Samuel Klein, a man in his 60s whose face seemed carved from granite, and disapproval showed not a flicker of emotion. He looked down at the single mother, a woman convicted of stealing $47 worth of groceries, despite video evidence showing a valid receipt, and his expression was one of cold, distant satisfaction, as if order, his kind of order, had been rightfully restored. In that moment, Clara made a silent vow. This was not the end. For Judge Klein, for the corrupt system that protected him, this was only the beginning of the end. What happens when a single unjust verdict ignites a firestorm that threatens to burn down a corrupt judicial empire? The story you are about to hear is a testament to the power of one person's courage against a mountain of prejudice. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you believe is the most powerful tool in the fight for justice. And if you're ready for a story that will restore your faith in the power of the people, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The trial of Monique Hayes was a sham from the moment Judge Klein first struck his gavel. The courtroom itself felt like a relic from a more brutal era, with dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb hope and fluorescent lights that cast a sickly, pallid glow on everyone. Clara Bennett, a young but already formidable civil rights attorney, knew she was walking into hostile territory. Greenville was Judge Klein's kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist. His personal biases thinly veiled as a strict adherence to law and order. Her client, Monique Hayes, was a 29-year-old single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her son. On the day in question, she had been shopping at a local grocery store. After paying, she was confronted in the parking lot by 2 police officers who claimed she looked suspicious. Despite her showing them the receipt, the encounter escalated. They tackled her to the asphalt, the rough scrape of the ground, leaving bruises on her arms and a deeper wound on her dignity. The charge was petty theft, an accusation so flimsy it was transparently pretextual. The surveillance footage is clear, Your Honor. Clara had argued in a pre-trial motion. It shows Ms. Hayes at the checkout, it shows the cashier handing her a receipt, and it shows her calmly loading her groceries into her car. Judge Klein had watched the footage with an air of profound boredom. The footage shows a woman leaving a store. He countered, his voice flat. It does not prove she did not conceal items. The officers had probable cause based on their experience and observation. Motion to dismiss is denied. Clara had then tried to introduce the arresting officer's record. Your Honor, Officer Miller has 17 civilian complaints filed against him for racial profiling in the last 3 years alone. This pattern is directly relevant to his motivations in arresting my client. Klein's eyes had narrowed into dangerous slits. Counselor, you are attempting to put the police on trial. That is not what we do in this courtroom. The officer's history is irrelevant to the facts of this specific case. That motion is also denied. and I suggest you refrain from such speculative tactics going forward. The trial was a masterclass in judicial obstruction. Every time Clara tried to expose the racial bias at the heart of the case, Clean shut her down. He sustained the prosecution's most baseless objections while overruling her valid ones. He spoke to her with a clipped, condescending tone, often cutting her off mid-sentence, while treating the prosecutor with collegial respect. He was sending a clear message to the jury the defense was an annoyance, a distraction from the simple, foregone conclusion. This case is not about a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, Clara declared in her closing argument, her voice resonating with a passion that defied the judge's oppressive atmosphere. It is about a system that criminalizes black women for the simple act of existing. It is about officers who see suspicion where there is none and a court that validates that prejudice. Look at Monique Hayes. Do you see a criminal, or do you see a mother, a worker, a citizen who was brutalized and humiliated for doing nothing more than buying food for her child? The jury had seemed moved. There were uneasy glances, furrowed brows. But Judge Klein, in his final instructions, had skillfully undone all of her work. The law is clear, he stated, his voice a powerful, instructive baritone. The sworn testimony of an officer of the law carries significant weight. Your duty is to weigh the evidence presented in this room, not to speculate on wider social issues. You must trust the integrity of our law enforcement, for without that trust, there is only chaos. It was a brilliant, insidious manipulation. He had framed the verdict as a choice between order and anarchy, between trusting the police and descending into chaos. The jury, intimidated and guided, returned in under an hour. Guilty. The word echoed in Clara's mind as she stormed out of the courthouse, her heels clicking in an angry rhythm on the marble floor. The fury in her chest was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. As she pushed through the heavy oak doors into the harsh afternoon sun, she was met by a swarm of reporters. Microphones and cameras were thrust in her face, a chaotic wall of noise and flashing lights. "Ms. Bennett, what's your response to the verdict?" a reporter shouted. Clara stopped. She turned to face the media frenzy, and the raw, unfiltered indignation on her face silenced them. "My response," she repeated, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "My response is that this was not a trial, it was a performance. It was a state-sanctioned assault on a black woman, rubber-stamped by a judge whose bigotry is as plain as the robe on his back." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Samuel Klein did not preside over a court of law today. She continued, her voice rising with every word. He presided over a ceremony of prejudice. He willfully ignored evidence, silenced testimony, and steered a jury to a conclusion that served his racist agenda. This verdict is a stain on this county, and I will not rest until every person responsible for it, from the arresting officers to the judge himself, is held accountable. This is not over. She pushed through the stunned reporters, leaving a trail of shocked silence in her wake. Her words, captured on a dozen cameras, were more than a statement. They were a declaration of war. Clara's small apartment was transformed into a command center. Stacks of files and legal pads covered every surface, the walls, plastered with flowcharts and notes. She barely slept, fueled by black coffee and a burning sense of purpose. Her impassioned speech outside the courthouse had gone viral, igniting a firestorm on social media. The hashtags "Rauch Justice for Monique" and "Corrupt Judge Klein" were trending nationwide. But Clara knew that public outrage was fleeting. To truly bring down a man like Klein, She needed an arsenal of irrefutable evidence. She started with a deep dive into 2 decades of his rulings. With the help of a few trusted paralegals working pro bono, she began compiling data. The statistical patterns that emerged were chilling. Klein's conviction rate for black defendants was 87% compared to 45% for white defendants facing similar charges. The average sentence he handed down to people of color was nearly 3 times longer. While the numbers were damning, she needed more. She needed to connect the dots between his judicial bias and the system that enabled it. Her research led her to the local police union's financial disclosures. And there it was. For the last 10 years, coinciding with his last 2 re-election campaigns, Judge Klein had received substantial, though cleverly disguised donations from the union's Political Action Committee. He wasn't just biased, he was compromised. His rulings weren't just prejudiced. They were potentially quid pro quo. To break the story, she needed an ally in the media, someone who wouldn't be intimidated. She found him in Elias Vance, a veteran investigative journalist for the Greenville Herald, a man whose cynicism was as legendary as his talent. A racist judge in the South? That's not a story, counselor, that's the weather, Vance said, his voice a gravelly monotone over the phone. This is different, Clara insisted. I have data, and I have financial records linking him to the police union. That got his attention. They met in a dingy coffee shop. Clara laid out her files, her arguments precise and compelling. Vance listened, his expression unreadable. He reviewed the data, his sharp eyes scanning the spreadsheets. Finally, he looked up at her. This is good, he admitted, but it's not enough. The establishment will circle the wagons. They'll call it circumstantial. To make this stick, you need someone from the inside to talk. Finding that person seemed impossible. The courthouse staff was fiercely loyal to Klein, or terrified of him. But Clara remembered a name from her research, a former court clerk who had resigned abruptly 5 years ago after a contentious case involving Klein and a police brutality lawsuit. She tracked the woman, a Ms. Gable, down to a quiet suburb 2 hours away. Ms. Gable was hesitant at first, her fear still palpable after all these years. You don't know what he's like, she whispered, perched on the edge of her armchair. He can destroy careers with a single phone call. He is destroying lives with a single verdict. Clara countered gently. You left for a reason. You saw something. Tears welled in Ms. Gable's eyes. She nodded, and for the next 2 hours, she told Clara everything. She spoke of secret meetings between Klein and the police union, president of case files that went missing of the judge, openly using racial slurs in his chambers. She had resigned after Klein had personally threatened her for questioning his decision to seal evidence that would have exonerated a black defendant. Clara recorded the entire conversation. It was the dynamite she needed. She gave the recording to Elias Vance. His story, published on the front page of the Sunday Herald, was an explosive exposé. It combined the cold, hard data of Klein's bias, the damning financial records, and the explosive on-the-record testimony of a former clerk. The article was titled, "The Kingdom of Kleiner Judges, Reign of Bias and Corruption." The city erupted. The protests, which had been small and sporadic, swelled into a massive organized movement. Hundreds, then thousands of people from all walks of life gathered daily outside the courthouse. Their chants of justice for Monique and disbar Judge Klein echoed through the city streets. National news outlets descended on Greenville, turning a local scandal into a referendum on the American justice system. The pressure was immense. The state's Judicial Council, a body known for its inertia, was forced to act. They announced the formation of an independent commission to investigate Judge Klein. Simultaneously, Clara filed a formal appeal of Monique's conviction, citing judicial misconduct. The establishment did, as Vance had predicted, circle the wagons. A powerful attorney, representing Klein, held a press conference dismissing the allegations as a politically motivated witch hunt, led by a radical anti-police activist. Anonymous threats began to appear in Clara's inbox. A brick was thrown through her office window, but she was undaunted. She was no longer just one lawyer fighting for one client. She was the face of a movement, and the entire nation was watching. The appellate court hearing for Monique Hayes was a media circus. The courtroom was packed with satellite trucks lining the street outside. This wasn't just about one overturned conviction anymore. It was about the potential downfall of a powerful judge and the system that had protected him. Clara stood before the three-judge appellate panel, her voice calm and steady, but her arguments were devastating. She didn't just relitigate Monique's case. She put Judge Klein's entire career on trial. The conviction of Monique Hayes was not the result of a fair trial she began. It was the inevitable outcome of a courtroom presided over by a judge whose documented long-standing bias renders him fundamentally unfit for the bench. We have provided this court with statistical evidence demonstrating a clear pattern of racial discrimination in Judge Klein's sentencing. We have provided financial records showing a deeply inappropriate relationship with the very police department whose testimony he consistently deems infallible. And we have provided sworn testimony from a former court clerk detailing his efforts to obstruct justice. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. To uphold Monique Hayes's conviction would be to validate this corruption. It would be a declaration that in Greenville County, the color of your skin matters more than the facts of your case. Justice demands that this conviction be overturned, and it demands that Samuel Klein never be allowed to preside over another case again. The state's attorney, a man clearly uncomfortable defending the indefensible, offered a weak rebuttal about judicial discretion and the need to respect the trial court's findings. The appellate judges were unmoved. Their questions were sharp and pointed focused almost entirely on Klein's conduct. 2 weeks later, their decision came down. It was unanimous. Monique Hayes's conviction was overturned, but they went further. In a scathing 30-page opinion, they referred Judge Klein's case to the state's Judicial Council for immediate disciplinary action, citing overwhelming evidence of gross judicial misconduct and a flagrant disregard for the principles of an impartial judiciary. The news sent shockwaves through the legal community. Monique, standing next to Clara on the courthouse steps, burst into tears of relief, hugging her son tightly. The crowd of protesters erupted in cheers. Justice for Monique had finally been served. But Clara wasn't finished. The Judicial Council's investigation moved swiftly. Armed with the appellate court's damning opinion and Clara's mountain of evidence, they held a formal hearing. Klein, stripped of his judicial authority, and his arrogance was a shadow of his former self. He offered weak denials and blamed disgruntled employees, but it was no use. The council's decision was historic. Judge Samuel Klein was permanently removed from the bench and disbarred, a stunning fall from grace for a man who had once seemed untouchable. The news was a thunderclap, a clear message that the old ways of entrenched power and prejudice would no longer be tolerated. As Clara watched the announcement on a TV screen, surrounded by her jubilant team, she felt not triumph, but a profound sense of weary satisfaction. They had won. They had toppled a king. Months passed. The fight for justice in Greenville continued, but something had fundamentally shifted. The removal of Judge Klein had created a power vacuum, and a new generation of reformers, inspired by Clara's fight, began to step up. The old guard was on the defensive. The system, slowly, painfully, was beginning to change. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara received a phone call from the governor's office. She had been nominated to fill a vacancy on the Greenville County Court. She was stunned into silence. Her a judge. The idea had never crossed her mind. She was a fighter, an advocate, an outsider. The governor believes the aide on the phone said that the court doesn't need another insider. It needs a conscience. It needs you. The confirmation process was contentious, but the overwhelming public support, led by a coalition of community groups organized by activists like the ones who had fought for Monique, pushed her through. On the day of her swearing in, the courtroom was packed. Monique Hayes sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Elias Vance, the cynical journalist, stood in the back, a rare, genuine smile on his face. As Clara took her place on the bench, wearing the black robe that had once been a symbol of oppression, she looked out at the faces before her. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for Monique, for Ms. Gable, for every person who had ever been wronged by the system she was now a part of. She knew the work ahead would be hard. Changing a culture of injustice is a marathon, not a sprint. But as she raised her right hand and took the oath, she felt not the weight of the robe, but the strength of the people who had put her there. The courtroom erupted in applause, not just for a new judge, but for the dawn of a new era. The story of Clara Bennett and Monique Hayes is a powerful testament to the fact that one person's unwavering courage can indeed topple an empire. It reminds us that systems of injustice are not monolithic forces. They are built and maintained by individuals, and they can be dismantled by individuals. It is a long, arduous, and often dangerous fight, but this story shows that when people unite, when the press is fearless, and when the demand for accountability becomes a roar that cannot be ignored, change is not only possible, it is inevitable. The question it leaves us with is not whether we will face injustice in our own lives, but how we will choose to respond when we do. Thank you for watching. If this story of resilience and righteous anger inspired you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. For more stories that celebrate the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to tell the stories that need to be told. We'll see you next time.